Hi, in this session we'll talk about the safety aspect of digital citizenship. And the goal is to keep our kids safe online, but they can't follow what this guy in the cartoon's doing, unplugging from the web, because they carry the internet in their pocket. So most middle and high school kids access the web every day, many of them on mobile devices. A quarter of the kids use a mobile device as their normal way of getting on the web. So how does a school or a home control that? Let's look at the guidance that schools provide. So this is a poster that's for schools to teach digital citizenship. And it talks about food and drink nowhere near the computer, don't change settings, follow directions, respect others and their work, and only print and visit websites by permission. Compare that to a similar guideline from schools with the nice acronym SAFE to guide kids for online safety. The S for just share personal information with those people you know. Ask an adult if something makes you uncomfortable. Don't meet face to face with somebody you don't know, and be polite. Practice etiquette, and report somebody who's rude. Well, do any of these give kids rules for judgment or guidelines for judgment? They're a series of rules, whereas we would like kids to be able to have guidelines they can internalize to guide them when they're using the internet in their pocket and no adult is looking over their shoulder. Now, safety is related to risk. And by way of comparison, let's look at physical injuries. They happen in schools, mostly by accidents. Injuries are 9 times more accidental than intentional, like fights. Most injuries, the serious ones, are falls. And for sports, and this is a big deal, $109 billion a year are the cost of school injuries. How about outside of school? What are the threats to kids? Traffic and falls are the biggest threats to kids physically. In terms of deaths, believe it or not, drowning is more serious than falls or bicycle accidents or that sort of thing. In its most extreme case, let's look at the most common causes of death for children. So accidents are the most common cause for elementary, middle, and high school kids. And while we can try to make things more safer for them that accidents don't happen, that's not something related to the internet. Similarly, the second most common cause for elementary and middle school kids, cancer, we have no control over that. Elementary kids, developmental, genetic conditions, we have no control over that. But high school and middle school's second leading cause of death is suicide, and things like bullying and cyberbullying have been connected with some suicide. So let's look more closely at that. Violent crime in general in school, this is not accidental, this is intentional violence, has actually gone down to about 70% fewer homicides from 1993 to 2010, and maybe a 60% drop in other serious violent crimes of aggravated assault, rape, sexual assault during the same time period. In terms of bullying, these are the categories of bullying. So the most common would be the name calling and insults. The least common would be an actual weapon or making fun of somebody because of their disability or their race or their sexual orientation. The cyberbullying composes about 30% of the bullying threats. Now, who in schools is doing this? Well, it's not just the U.S. The U.S. is smack in the middle of the OECD nations. Austria actually has the worst bullying record of any nation. But in the U.S., it's clearly the middle school kids that are the biggest bullies. And that's reasonable because those are the years where they're establishing a personal identity and a social identity. And they don't know how to do that. It's the first time they've done it, and they're very concerned about threats to that personal and social identity. So, of these middle school kids, and high school kids too, but not as much, elementary is not a big deal here. It used to be with regular bullies, you were safe at home. Cyberbullying, not so much. So we're pretty concerned about that. How have those rates changed? Well, the graph here is based on 7 separate studies, no one of which is authoritative. But as a group, they show a decrease. The scale is different here. It goes from 2004 to 2010 here, where according to these studies, cyberbullying has reduced by about 50%. Maybe because there are more cyberbullying programs, so kids are more aware of it. You'd think they'd report it more also. So this is good news. How else are kids protected on the web? Well, federally, the CIPA law, the Children's Internet Protection Act, was the first federal statute. There have been a few more after that, but this is the one that is of the most concern to us. And this act affects any school or library that receives federal funds. So some private schools are exempt from CIPA. And it requires not much that schools adopt an internet and implement an internet policy. It doesn't require that they protect kids against this threat or that, but rather that they have a policy that addresses those threats. So, for example, a policy of access by kids to inappropriate sites or to materials online that may be harmful to them. A policy needs to address what's the school district's policy on this. Similarly, disseminating personal information of minors or hacking by kids or adults. What's the district's policy on this? Do they permit it? Do they prohibit it? What might be a penalty? And for kids' use of email and chat rooms and other forms of communication, it doesn't prohibit any of this, but it requires that schools have a policy that address it. Why a policy for email and chat rooms? What possible harm could that be? Well, the fear is again, worst case, child abduction. That a child meets someone online, that person wants to harm them, abducts them. And according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, there are 250,000 abductions per year, but about 80% of them are by family members, and most of the rest are by people the child knows. So about 1/20th of 1% are the actual criminal stranger abductions for physical or sexual abuse that people worry about so much. That's 1 out of about 2,000 objections. During the 5-year period, 1995 to 2000, about 135 children were abducted in that way. So it really happens, and it works out to be about 1 for every 2 states every year. About 99% of the children who are abducted are found by police within days or hours. So let's put that again into perspective. So David Finkelhor is the director of the Crimes Against Children Research Center. And in his words, he says, It's not clear that the internet has placed children at greater risk. Yes, it's an avenue that people use, but would they have used another avenue without the internet? He says more of crime and just general social life is moving online, but that doesn't necessarily increase the risk to our children. And he says, in fact, the opposite may be true because the internet means that some of these criminal acts will be detected. Messages can be traced, for example, to sometimes prevent the occurrence or in other times to retrieve a child promptly. Finkelhor has a caution for us. He says, forced abduction is a terrible problem, but it's so rare and gets headlines that the media and public have an unreasonable fear that the internet is some dark place and the main thing about it is our kids need to be protected. The National School Boards Association, when the internet was young, had a clear message to schools. This is dangerous. We need to protect our kids from the internet. After about 5 years, they changed their tune. They sent a message to every school who was a member saying, we overreacted. There's much more that's great and good and wholesome on the internet for our kids. They need to know how to use it well than we had feared, and you all need to restructure, recalibrate your fear guidelines. So we're still, the fear that parents have and school officials have make it more difficult. How can that be? Because the response is to prohibit access, to say, no, you can't use phones in school. We're not going to teach you how to use them safely as we should. We're just going to say no. And you know what kids' response to that is. And in the intervening time, sadly, the real problem has shown up. The kids who are vulnerable to these online seductions, to the criminal abduction, turn out to be the kids who are most alienated from their parents. So it's not the internet that's the prime cause of it, even though it may be the vehicle. There are deeper issues that are reflected here. Well, what could possibly cause this reaction to kids? And of course, this is an unstated fear of so many parents and school districts. They'll see something on there that will corrupt them for life. Well, an earlier study suggested that they think the largest group of internet porn viewers is actually middle and high school kids because it's new to them and they're curious. Some of our messages come from our religious institutions, sort of the guardians of morality. So this particular message is from Spencer Kimball, who is a member of the Latter-day Saints religion. He says, we need to constantly guard against immorality, pornography, sexual permissiveness, that this would destroy the purity of the family members, young and old. So as we think about what are the real threats for our kids and how can we best prepare them to responsibly traverse this wonderful resource, the internet, we need to continually think, how can she be given the tools to grow up responsibly in a way that keeps her safe online?